The Blood Oath. Chapter 1. The Oath Forged in Blood. The banners of Ilarion hung limp in the smoke-choked sky. Their crimson and gold faded beneath ash and soot. Once, the kingdom had been a beacon of light across the realms, its fields rich with harvest, its rivers teeming with fish, its people singing songs that echoed from valley to valley. But now there was only silence, broken by the distant rumble of drums. War drums, the kind that carried doom in every strike. The council hall of stone stood battered yet unbroken at the heart of the capital. Its marble pillars bore cracks, and its walls still bore the scars of siege fire. Within, the last remaining generals of Ilarion gathered in grim silence around a great oak table. Maps lay sprawled across its surface, ink smudged by hurried fingers and trembling hands. At the head of the table stood General Kalin Veros, a warrior whose black hair had streaked to silver far too early from battle's weight. His armor, dented and scarred, was kept not for pride, but for necessity. Kalin's voice broke the silence, firm and unyielding. Our enemies do not sleep. The horde marches as we speak. By dawn, their shadows will fall upon our walls, and we— He let his hand rest upon the map where dozens of black markers showed the encroaching armies. We are too few. A murmur spread among the warriors. Some gripped their sword hilts, others lowered their eyes. Hope was a luxury long since abandoned. Yet one voice rose. It belonged to Arik Thalin, a younger captain, his face still marked by the fire of defiance. "Then we fight," he said. "If we are to fall, let us fall with blades drawn. Ilarion deserves nothing less." Kalin looked at him, something between sorrow and admiration flickering in his eyes. He had heard such words before, spoken by men long buried in forgotten fields. Courage was not their problem. Time was. Strength was. From the shadows of the hall, High Seer Melira, robed in gray and silver, stepped forward. Her staff clinked against the stone floor as she approached. Her eyes, blind and clouded, yet piercing in their depth, surveyed the warriors. "There is a way," she whispered, "a way to bind your souls, to make your blades unbreakable, your will unbending, a way to stand against the tide even when flesh fails you." The room stilled. Warriors shifted uneasily, for all had heard whispers of her forbidden arts. Kalin's voice was low. "You speak of the Blood Oath." A hush fell like a shroud. Even the torches seemed to flicker lower. The Blood Oath. A ritual older than kingdoms, said to be carved into existence by the gods themselves during the First Wars. It was not spoken of lightly, for its power came at a cost no mortal could ever fully grasp. Those who swore it were bound to their land, their people, their very bones tied to the soil they defended. Even in death, they did not rest. Eric's brow furrowed. Is it true, then, that the oath gives a man the strength of 10, but steals his soul when he falls? Melira inclined her head, slow and deliberate. Strength beyond measure, yes, but you will not pass peacefully into the afterlife. Your oath binds you to Ilarion until her need is no more. As flesh, you will fight. As bone, you will fight. As shadow, you will fight, until the end of all things. A silence, heavier than steel, filled the hall. The warriors looked to Kalin. He stared at the map, at the black tide closing in. He thought of his daughter, hidden away in the northern keep. He thought of the farmers who had taken up pitchforks in trembling hands, waiting for soldiers who might never arrive. He thought of the land he had bled for, the men and women who had followed him into battles uncounted. At last, he spoke. "Then let it be done." The hall erupted with murmurs. Some cried out in protest, others with fervent agreement. Arik slammed his fist against the table. "If our souls must burn, let them burn for Ilarion. I will swear it." One by one, the warriors voiced their assent, their fear swallowed by the fire of loyalty. Some hesitated, but none walked away. There was nowhere to walk. That night, beneath the shattered dome of the Sky Temple, the ritual was prepared. The moon hung pale and wan, veiled by drifting smoke. Candles lined the cracked marble floor, their flames guttering in the cold wind. At the center, Mylira drew a circle with her staff, inscribing runes that glowed faintly red as if the stone itself bled. The warriors assembled, each with blade in hand. Kaelin stood at the center, his voice solemn. "Brothers, sisters, tonight we are no longer merely flesh. Tonight we swear not to life, but to the land itself. Our blood will bind us. Our oath will define us, until death and beyond." He drew his sword, pressing the edge against his palm until blood welled bright. He let it drip into the runes, where the stone hissed and drank it in. One by one the others followed. Eric, grim-faced though his hand trembled. Old Sir Doran, who had fought in wars before Kaelin was born. Fierce Elira of the Southern Watch, her braid falling loose as she bled into the stone. The circle flared. Crimson light rose like fire winding around their bodies, seeping into their veins. The ground trembled. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of eternity. Mylira raised her staff, her voice echoing with power. "By blood you are bound. By oath you are chained. This land is your flesh, its people your breath. So long as it stands, so shall you. Warriors of Alarion, rise, oath-bound." A shockwave burst outward, the candles extinguished. The moonlight flared white, and the warriors fell to their knees, gasping as the power surged through them. Kaelin rose first. His eyes glowed faintly like embers. He clenched his bloodied hand and felt strength thrumming in his bones, a fire that would never extinguish. Around him his comrades rose, transformed, not in body, but in spirit. Their resolve had been hammered into something unbreakable. Yet in the depths of their hearts, a chill lingered. For each knew the truth. Their souls no longer belonged to them. At dawn, the horns of the horde sounded across the fields. A sea of enemies, endless and merciless, advanced upon Alarion's gates. But upon the walls stood Kaelin and his oath-bound warriors, their eyes burning with the crimson fire of the blood oath. And when the first wave struck, they did not falter. Their blades flashed, their shields held, their war cries thundered like storms. For they were no longer men and women of flesh. They were bound to something greater, bound to fight, bound to endure, bound until the end. Thus began the tale of the blood oath. Chapter 2. Shadows of Betrayal. The first clash had passed like a storm, but storms always return. The fields before Alarion's walls were littered with broken spears, shattered shields, and the bodies of the fallen. Yet not all who had fallen remained still. Some stirred, men pierced through by arrows, women crushed beneath pikes, yet they rose again, eyes burning faint crimson, their wounds sealing with unnatural force. The oath had bound them, and even death's embrace was not enough to keep them down. The enemy fell back in terror, their chants broken, their lines faltering as whispers spread of undying warriors. The first victory belonged to Alarion, but within the city walls the taste of triumph was bitter. In the aftermath, the warriors gathered again within the council hall. The air smelled of iron and smoke. Torches hissed along the damp stone, and silence pressed down upon them like a weight. Arik, blood still caked upon his face, slammed his gauntleted fist against the table. "You saw them," he growled. "Men struck down, yet they rose again. We cannot be defeated. With this oath, we will drive the horde back to the abyss from which they crawled." Elira, her braid darkened with ash, shot him a sharp look. And at what cost? Did you not see Sir Doran's face when he rose again? His eyes, they were not his own. Kaelin, seated at the head of the table, said nothing at first. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly the wood creaked. He had seen it too. Warriors rising with screams that did not belong to the living. Movements too sharp, too rigid. High Seer Mylera entered quietly, as if her very presence were smoke. She leaned upon her staff, her blind gaze sweeping the hall. The oath keeps its promises. You are bound. You will fight until the land no longer needs you, but do not mistake the gift for mercy. What you saw today is only the beginning. A chill moved through the hall. The words no longer sounded like salvation. They sounded like prophecy. Later that night, the oath-bound sat around a fire in the barracks yard. The men and women of Ilarion had begun to look at them differently, not just as warriors, but as something other. Children stared wide-eyed, whispering of heroes. Some priests, however, turned away, muttering of curses. Eric grinned, holding out his mug of ale. Let them whisper. If we are cursed, then cursed be our enemies tenfold. We will not fall. Beside him, Sir Doran remained silent. The old knight's gaze was fixed upon the flames, his face drawn tight with something unspoken. At last he muttered, "Not falling is not the same as living." The words cut into the night. A few turned away. A few nodded grimly. For though the oath had given them power, it had taken something they did not yet understand. Within days, rumors began to spread. Food stores were dwindling. Supplies from the outer villages no longer reached the city, burned by the advancing horde or stolen by raiders. The common folk began to whisper that perhaps the war was lost, that perhaps even the oath-bound could not save them. Fear festered in alleyways, in markets, in the quiet corners of taverns. And then came something darker. A messenger, ragged, breathless, arrived at the gates one evening. He bore news not of the horde, but of betrayal. The northern keep, where Kaelin's daughter and many refugees had been sent, had fallen. Not by siege, not by force, by treachery. A noble lord, once sworn to Ilarion, had opened the gates from within, striking a deal with the enemy in exchange for his life and power. Kaelin stood motionless as the news was spoken, but those who knew him saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand trembled upon his sword hilt. Arik was the first to break the silence. "Name him," he demanded. The messenger bowed his head. "Lord Varys of the Iron Vale." The name was poison. Varys, once an ally, once seated at the same war table as Kaelin himself. Kaelin's voice was low, almost a growl. "Then Varys has signed his death with his own hand." The council was divided. Some argued they could not afford to divide their strength, that the horde must remain their only concern. Others demanded vengeance, justice, the restoration of honor, but for Kaelin, it was not just about vengeance. His daughter's fate was unknown, perhaps alive, perhaps not. The blood oath had bound him to his land, but the man within him was still a father. That night, in the temple where the oath had been sworn, Kaelin prayed, not to the gods who had long since abandoned them, but to the land itself. His blood already belonged to it, yet he whispered, "If she yet lives, guide me to her. If she is lost, grant me the strength to see Varys fall." The stone beneath him seemed to hum faintly, as though listening. The march to the Iron Vale began under moonlight. A band of oath-bound, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, moved swift and silent across the fields. They wore no banners. They bore no trumpets. This was not war. It was judgment. Eric walked beside Kaelin, his expression fierce. "When we find Varys, let me strike first. Betrayal deserves no honorable blade. It deserves fire." Kaelin did not answer. His silence was answer enough. The journey was long, marked by skirmishes with roaming bands of enemy scouts, but none could stand before the oath-bound. Their swords cut like fire through dry grass, their wounds closing almost as quickly as they were struck. Yet with every battle, they noticed more. When a comrade fell and rose again, their faces seemed less human. Their voices grew harsher, tinged with something otherworldly. Elira whispered to Kaelin one night as they rested by a river, If this oath continues, what will we become? Kaelin stared at his reflection in the water, seeing the faint ember glow in his eyes. He had no answer. At last, the iron veil rose before them, a fortress carved into black rock, its gates towering and iron-bound. Once a proud stronghold of Alarion's nobility, now its walls bore the banners of the enemy, crimson serpents coiled upon fields of black. Kaelin felt a storm building within him. His oath burned in his veins, urging him forward. But beneath it all was something deeper, something older. Rage. The oathbound gathered at the tree line, their eyes fixed upon the gates. The plan was simple. Strike fast, strike hard, leave none alive. But as they prepared, Melira's voice echoed in Kaelin's mind, a memory of her warning. The oath keeps its promises, but do not mistake its gift for mercy. He pushed the thought aside. There would be no mercy this night. The assault began with silence. No horns, no drums, only shadows moving swiftly across the field. They scaled the walls like wraiths, their crimson eyes glowing faint in the dark. Guards fell with whispers of steel. Arrows struck, but the oathbound did not falter. Wounds closed as fast as they opened. When at last the gates were forced open, Kaelin himself led the charge into the heart of the iron veil. And there, upon the high steps of the keep, clad in blackened armor, stood Lord Varys. His once proud face was lined with arrogance, his hand resting upon the hilt of a blade gifted by the enemy. He spread his arms wide. "So it is true," Varys sneered. "The dead walk at Kaelin's command." Kaelin's voice thundered in reply. "Not the dead, the oathbound." The courtyard erupted in blood and steel. Kaelin fought his way toward Varys, cutting through traitor knights and enemy soldiers alike. Arik fought at his side, blade flashing like lightning, his fury unrestrained. At last, Kaelin and Varys met in the center of the courtyard. Their blades clashed, sparks bursting with each strike. Varys fought with the desperation of a cornered beast, but Kaelin's strength was more than mortal. Blow by blow, he drove Varys back, until at last Kaelin's blade pierced his chest. As Varys fell to his knees, he spat blood and laughter both. "You think you've saved her? Fool, the girl is already gone, taken beyond your reach." Kaelin's fury consumed him. With a roar, he drove his sword through Varys entirely, pinning him to the stone. The oath burned bright within him, demanding the traitor's end. When it was done, Varys lay still, his laughter echoing in Kaelin's ears. But victory brought no peace. The words lingered. "The girl is already gone." Kaelin looked to the sky, his oath burning hotter than ever. His daughter's fate remained a shadow. His soul weighed heavier by the curse he bore. And though Varys lay dead, the cracks in the Brotherhood had deepened. They had seen too much, felt too much. For even among the oathbound, shadows of betrayal still lingered. Chapter 3. The Siege of Ashen Fields. The march back from the Iron Vale was a quiet one. Varys had fallen, his body left to rot where Kaelin's blade had struck him down, yet his final words haunted the general's every step. "The girl is already gone." Kaelin rode at the head of the oathbound, his crimson glowing eyes fixed upon the horizon. His men followed in grim silence, their armor stained with blood that would never wash away. Each of them carried not just swords and scars, but the weight of the oath that chained them tighter with every passing day. As the black spires of Alarion's capital came into view, smoke already tainted the sky. Scouts rushed forward with grim tidings. The horde had arrived. Their encampments stretched across the ashen fields, a wasteland of charred earth that had once been fertile farmland. Tens of thousands had gathered. Orc warbands, mercenary soldiers, shadow beasts conjured from dark sorcery. Their banners blotted out the horizon like a storm. Ilarion's walls, though tall and strong, trembled beneath the drums of war. That night the oathbound gathered upon the ramparts. Below them, the enemy fires stretched endlessly, a sea of orange flickers devouring the land. Arik clenched his fists around the stone battlement. "So many," he muttered. "How can we stand against that?" Elira, her braid whipping in the cold wind, shot him a sharp glance. "You already know the answer, Arik. We are oath-bound. Until the land falls, we do not." Kalen stood silent, his gaze fixed upon the sea of fire. Inside, his heart pounded, not from fear, but from the oath burning hotter, demanding battle. It was no longer simply duty. It was compulsion. The oath hungered for war. Mylira's voice echoed behind them. The seer had taken her place upon the ramparts, her staff glowing faintly with runes of protection. "The ashen fields will be your crucible. If you hold, the city may yet survive. If you fall—" She left the words unsaid. Dawn came, not with sunlight, but with the black smoke of burning pitch. The horde advanced like a tide unleashed, their war cries shaking the earth. Siege towers rolled forward, massive and spiked, while catapults hurled flaming stones that shattered against Alarion's walls. The oathbound took their places. Kalen at the main gate, Arik with the northern guard, Elira upon the southern wall. Their blades gleamed crimson in the rising firelight. The first clash was thunder. Arrows darkened the sky. Stones shattered battlements. But the oathbound did not waver. Kalen raised his blade, his voice booming across the field. "For Ilarion!" The oathbound roared as one. And then the storm broke. The gates burst open, and Kalen led the charge into the ashen fields. His blade cut through the first wave of orc marauders, his strength more than mortal. Arrows pierced his armor, yet he tore them free and fought on, his wounds sealing with every strike. Around him, his warriors fought with unrelenting fury, men who should have fallen 10 times over, yet rose again with crimson fire in their eyes. Arik fought like a whirlwind, his blade singing as he carved through foes. Each time he fell, he rose again, laughing through bloodied lips. But his laughter grew strange, darker with each return. Elira held the southern flank, her bow singing death into the horde. When arrows ran short, she drew her blade and fought hand to hand, her cries fierce as any lioness. The enemy began to falter. Fear spread as stories of the undying reached their ears. But their numbers were endless, their war machines relentless. Hours passed like moments. The ashen fields became a graveyard. Smoke and fire blanketed the land, corpses piling so high the ground itself seemed to shift beneath their feet. Yet the oathbound fought on, their crimson eyes glowing brighter, their movements sharper, stranger. Kalen felt it. Every time he struck, every time his blade sank into flesh, the oath burned hotter, feeding upon blood, upon battle. He realized with horror that it was not just binding them, it was consuming them. At dusk, as the sun's dying light bled red across the sky, a horn sounded across the horde's lines. From their ranks stepped a figure unlike the rest. Clad in blackened steel, his helm crowned with horns, his eyes glowing green fire, the warlord of the horde. The battlefield stilled as his voice thundered. "So, these are the oathbound. Corpses that walk, blades that bleed forever. Then let us test this curse." He raised his hand, and the ground itself split open. From the fissures poured shadow beasts, creatures of nightmare with claws like scythes and bodies of smoke and bone. The oathbound faltered. For the first time, fear rippled through their ranks. Kalen roared, rallying them. "Stand! Alarion's blood runs through you. Do not falter now." And once more they surged into battle. Night fell. The ashen fields burned with unnatural fire. The clash of steel, the screams of dying men, the roars of beasts shook the earth. Kalen fought the warlord himself, their blades colliding with the force of thunder. Sparks lit the darkness as Kalen struck again and again, his oath driving him beyond mortal limits. But the warlord was no ordinary foe. His strength was monstrous, his strikes heavy as falling mountains. Around them the oath-bound fell and rose again. Yet each time they returned, their faces were less human, their movements more grotesque. The oath was stripping them away, piece by piece. Arik, blood-soaked and wild-eyed, cut down 3 enemies in a single stroke. But when he fell to a shadow beast and rose again, his comrades recoiled. His laughter was twisted now, echoing with something inhuman. Elira, too, bore wounds no living body should withstand. Yet she fought on, her eyes blazing crimson brighter than fire. At last, Kaelin drove his blade deep into the warlord's chest. The horned helm cracked, the green fire dimming. With a roar, the warlord staggered back, impaled. But as Kaelin wrenched his sword free, the warlord's laughter rumbled low. You fight beyond death itself, and so shall your curse. With one final strike, Kaelin severed his foe's head. The warlord collapsed, his body crumbling into ash. A cheer rose among the oath-bound. The horde faltered. For a moment, it seemed victory was theirs. But as Kaelin looked around, he saw the truth. The ashen fields were soaked with blood, but not only of the enemy. Dozens of his own warriors now moved like puppets of the oath, their humanity stripped away. They fought, yes, but they no longer bled, no longer spoke, no longer lived. And Kaelin knew then, this was no mere pact. It was a chain. As dawn broke over the battlefield, the horde retreated, their warlord slain. The people of Ilarion cheered from the walls, their hope rekindled. But among the oath-bound, silence reigned. They had won the battle. Yet each of them knew. The war was no longer just against the horde. It was against the curse that burned within their very souls. Kaelin stood in the midst of the corpses, his blade dripping, his eyes burning crimson. He whispered to himself, so quietly none heard. At what cost? The ashen fields answered only with silence. Chapter 4. Beyond Death's Veil. Ashen fields lay drowned in smoke and blood. The clash of steel had finally ended, but silence was no mercy. It was the silence of the dead. Thousands of corpses blanketed the once green valley, their armor broken, their banners torn, their blood soaking the blackened earth. Kaelin staggered across the battlefield, his sword dragging behind him. His body screamed with wounds, his lungs burned with ash, yet he still lived. Around him, only a handful of his oath-sworn brothers remained on their feet, their eyes hollow from exhaustion, their spirits heavy from the slaughter. They had won the siege. But at what cost? Elendor limped toward him, his armor dented, his face streaked with blood and soot. His voice cracked as he whispered, "So many, Kaelin. Too many. We are but a fraction of what we were." Kaelin clenched his jaw, his heart breaking at the sight of their fallen brothers strewn across the fields. They died for the oath, for the land. But even as he spoke, a terrible stillness washed over the battlefield. The smoke parted. The air grew unnaturally cold. And then the bodies began to move. At first, Kaelin thought it a cruel trick of his weary eyes, a twitch of a gauntleted hand, a shift of broken armor. But then the truth revealed itself. The slain oath-sworn, men who had fallen hours ago, were rising once more. Their eyes glowed faint crimson, the mark of the blood oath etched into their flesh like burning brands. They stood not as men, but as something beyond men, beyond death itself. Elendor's breath caught in his throat. No, this cannot be. Kaelin felt his blood run cold. He remembered the words spoken on the night of the oath, words they had taken as metaphor. Until death and beyond, the oath shall bind. It was no metaphor. It was truth. The risen warriors did not speak. Their faces were blank masks, their movements stiff yet unyielding. But when Kaelin met the eyes of one, Thalos, the youngest, who had died with a spear through his chest, he saw torment burning behind the glow. a silent scream trapped in an endless prison. "Thalos," Kalen whispered. The boy's lips parted, trembling as if he wished to cry out, but no sound came. Only the oath compelled him forward, blade in hand, as he joined the ranks of the undead oath sworn. Terror spread among the living. Some dropped their swords, backing away in horror. Others raised their weapons, torn between grief and fear. "They are not our brothers anymore," shouted one warrior, but Kalen's heart rebelled. He could not accept that. "They are our brothers. The oath has enslaved them, even in death." The truth crushed him. Victory at Ashen Fields was hollow. The enemy had fallen, but so had they. And yet, by the chains of the oath, they would fight forever, whether they willed it or not. Night fell upon the cursed battlefield. The living oath sworn stood side by side with the dead, their crimson eyes glowing faintly in the dark, bound together by an unbreakable pact. There was no rest, no mourning, only silence and the weight of eternity. Kalen gazed into the starless sky, his heart heavy with despair. For the first time since swearing the oath, he questioned whether they had damned themselves and their land alike. "If this is beyond death's veil," he whispered to himself, "then what waits for us in the end?" Chapter 5. The Last Stand of the Oath-Bearers. The dawn rose pale and sickly over Ashen Fields, its light dimmed by the smoke of pyres. But no fire touched the oath-sworn, neither living nor dead. They stood in grim silence, watching the horizon, waiting for the enemy's vengeance. For though they had won the battle, the war was not yet ended. Beyond the hills, horns thundered. The enemy's second host marched forth, an army twice the size of the first, clad in black iron and shadows. Their banners blotted the horizon like a tide of despair. Kalen stood at the front of the battered ranks. His sword was notched, his armor cracked, his spirit near broken. Around him, the living oath-sworn numbered only a few dozen. But behind them stood hundreds more, those who had fallen, risen again, and now burned with the oath's crimson light. A terrible army of the living and the dead. Elendor staggered to Kalen's side, his face pale but resolute. "We cannot win this battle," he rasped. Kalen's eyes hardened. "No, but we can end it." The blood oath did not allow surrender. It demanded protection of the land until death, and beyond. And now, with their mortal lives all but spent, only one path remained: to unleash the full fury of their cursed bond, no matter the cost. The enemy army surged across the fields, a sea of blades and beasts. Drums thundered, war cries split the air. Kalen raised his sword skyward, and the oath answered. Crimson light burst from his veins, arcing across every warrior bound by the pact. Both the living and the risen glowed like firebrands in the fog of war. The ground itself trembled, as if the earth remembered the ancient bargain and shuddered at its power. "Brothers," Kalen roared, his voice echoing like thunder, "this is our last stand. The land shall not fall while we still draw breath, and while our oath yet binds us beyond it." A cry erupted from the ranks, a cry of despair, of rage, of unbreakable defiance. Together, the oath-sworn charged. The clash was apocalyptic. Steel shattered, flesh burned, and crimson light cut through the endless black. Where one oath-sworn fell, another, dead or alive, rose in his place, striking with inhuman strength. They were not men now, but embodiments of the vow itself, vessels of unyielding will. Kalen fought like a storm given flesh, carving through ranks of armored foes, his sword a river of fire. Elendor stood at his side, shielding him again and again, even as wounds tore across his body. But still the enemy pressed on. At last, Kalen and his brothers reached the enemy's warlord, a giant in black steel, helm crowned with horns, wielding a cleaver the size of a man. He laughed at the oath sworn, mocking their cursed half-dead state. "Chained dogs," the warlord bellowed, "Bound to fight until the end of time." Kalen's voice thundered back, "Then let this be the end of time itself." With a final rallying cry, he drove the Oath's full power into one last strike. The earth split beneath their feet. Crimson fire erupted from the soil, consuming both Oath-sworn and enemy alike in a blinding inferno. The warlord's scream was drowned in the roar of the cursed flames, and when the light faded, there was nothing. The land was silent once more. The enemy host was ash upon the wind. The Oath-sworn were gone, both the living and the dead. Only their scorched blades remained, thrust into the earth like gravestones. But the land was free, the invaders broken. High in the sky, dawn's light pierced the clouds, golden and pure. Far away, in the quiet villages and the empty halls of kings, people would speak of the blood oath for centuries. They would tell of the warriors who fought beyond death, who stood when all others fell, who sacrificed everything for their land. Their names would fade. Their faces would be forgotten. But their vow, their final stand, would live forever. The blood oath had claimed them, but in that claim it had also saved the realm. The end.